On the coldest night Chicago had seen in 11 years, a blizzard came down over the West Loop like it had something to prove. The city had called a snow emergency by 8 o'clock. The restaurants shut early, the streets emptied out, and in a brick alley 3 blocks off Randolph Street, a homeless woman was quietly freezing to death, and she wasn't even trying to save herself. Aurelia Whitaker was 28 years old. 4 days ago she'd had a husband, an address, and a name people said with respect. Tonight she had a wall at her back, an empty wheelchair standing in the snow beside her, and her younger sister curled against her chest, a sister whose legs hadn't felt anything in 6 years, which meant the girl wouldn't know she was dying until she already was. So Aurelia had taken off her own coat and wrapped it around her. She'd been sitting there without it for 2 hours. And that's where Ryan Ferrante found them. At 37, Ryan owned a third of the construction contracts in that city, 3 judges who picked up after midnight, and an 18-room house in Kenilworth that nobody walked into but the cleaning staff. He'd buried his wife 6 years earlier and hadn't let a living thing near him since. He wasn't a good man. He'd never once pretended otherwise. His driver saw the shapes against the wall first and kept going in that line of work. You don't stop for what's in an alley. Ryan told him to back up. At first he thought it was a pile of blankets somebody had dumped by the trash. Then the blankets breathed. 2 people. He crossed the ice in a $12,000 suit and went down on his knees in the slush. And the younger one opened her eyes first and said it flat, dry, like she'd said it 100 times before. You calling the cops? Or you just gonna stand there? We've seen both. Then Aurelia woke up. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She didn't thank him. She looked at this man in a handmade coat and said the only thing she had left. Don't touch my sister. And when he reached for his phone to call an ambulance, she said something that stopped him cold. 3 words that made no sense from a woman who couldn't have had an hour left in her. Ryan Ferrante had spent his whole life knowing exactly what people wanted from him. Money, protection, a favor, a name. He'd never met anyone who wanted him gone. He carried them both to the car anyway. He told his man to bring the old wheelchair too, the one with the busted left wheel, the seat patched with duct tape, and what he did next didn't just save her life. It changed it forever. If this story moves you, take a second to hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And subscribe, because stories like this deserve to find the people who need them. Now let's go back to that alley, and to the night that started all of it. They'll find her records. Ryan stopped, his thumb hovering above the phone screen, now glowing with 3 digits. He'd heard every kind of thing people said when death was close. Pleading, cursing, praying. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. You're hypothermic, he said. You're not thinking clearly. Aurelia shook her head, a movement so slight it was almost nothing. Her lips had turned an ashen gray, but her voice still held that strange, measured rhythm of someone accustomed to reading numbers from a monitor during the darkest hours of an overnight shift. I'm more lucid than you think. I worked in the emergency room for 4 years. I know exactly what stage I'm in. She swallowed, and the effort cost her more than she wanted to admit. You call an ambulance, they enter her into the system. The system scans her name. Her name is tied to $214,000 in unpaid medical bills at Halloran Medical Group. Do you know what happens when a patient gets flagged like that? Ryan didn't answer. She gets transferred, Aurelia said. Sent to another facility, removed from the treatment protocol. It took me 3 years to get her accepted into that program. If she enters the system tonight, she'll be out of it by tomorrow morning. And I'll never get her back in. The wind screamed through the mouth of the alley like something wounded. Ryan looked down at the woman dying at his feet, the woman who had just used what little breath she had left to calculate a move 3 years into the future. He lowered the phone. Then he dialed a different number. It rang twice. Pike, he said. My house. 15 minutes, he didn't wait for an answer. He ended the call before the man on the other end could ask why. Ozzy had stepped out of the car and was standing at the mouth of the alley, his broad shadow blocking some of the wind. Rye, he said quietly. There are cameras on Randolph. 3 of them. The banks on the corner had them installed last month, I know. Then you also know who's watching. Ryan didn't respond. He knelt in the slush, and that was when he took a closer look at the young woman in her sister's arms. She looked to be somewhere in her early 20s, her brown hair matted with snow, her lips purple. The woman's coat wrapped around her clearly didn't belong to her. She wasn't shivering. That was the detail that made his stomach clench. People shivered while their bodies were still fighting. When the shivering stopped, the fighting had stopped too. "Don't rub her legs," Aurelia said the moment she saw his hand reach down. "Don't rub anything. If the cold blood in her limbs gets forced back toward her heart could stop. And don't give her anything hot to drink." "I wasn't going to. People always are." Ryan slid one arm beneath the young woman's back and the other beneath her knees, then lifted her. He had carried many things in his life. He had carried people. He knew the weight of a grown body. This young woman was so light that he faltered halfway through the motion, his body swaying because he had used too much strength for weight that simply wasn't there. For half a second, he stood motionless in the alley, holding a human being who weighed no more than a child, and he couldn't remember the last time he had seen anything so profoundly wrong. 4 days, Aurelia said, as though she could read the thought on his face. She gave me her share of the food. I gave it back to her. We just kept passing it back and forth like two fools. Ryan started toward the car. Behind him, he heard movement, scraping, fabric dragging over ice. He turned around. Aurelia couldn't stand. She was crawling. Her legs no longer obeyed her, so she used her elbows, dragging herself through the snow inch by inch, and she was crawling toward the wheelchair. Not toward the warm car. Toward the wheelchair. She reached it, but her fingers could no longer curl, so she hooked her entire arm through the frame and held on like a drowning person clinging to a broken plank. Ozzy looked at the wheelchair, then at his boss. The left wheel was warped. The seat had been patched with silver duct tape. The armrests were wrapped in rags. It was the kind of thing a man like Ryan Ferrante would pay someone else to haul away and throw out. "Leave it," Ozzy said. "I'll buy her a new one before 7 o'clock in the morning. Bring it." Ozzy remained still for a single beat. He had worked for this man for 19 years, and he knew that voice, the one that left no room for a second question. He bent down and lifted the wheelchair. The left wheel gave a dry, broken squeak in the night, a small, shabby sound that didn't belong anywhere in the West Loop. And no one in the world heard it except the 3 people in that alley, because the city had declared a state of emergency at 8 o'clock, and everyone who still had somewhere to go had gone home long before. Ryan placed the young woman in the back seat, turned the heat all the way up, then went back for the older sister. Aurelia didn't resist. She had nothing left with which to resist. But when he lifted her, her arm remained hooked through the wheelchair frame, and Ozzy had to pry her fingers loose one by one. Marisol Fuentes heard the gate open at 11:40, and she knew at once that something was wrong, because Ryan Ferrante never came home before 1 in the morning, and never came home with anyone. She reached the foyer just in time to see him walk in, snow covering his shoulders, an unmoving young woman in his arms. Ozzy followed behind him, carrying another woman. Marisol froze where she stood. 2 rooms, Ryan said. 2nd floor. East wing. She didn't ask him to repeat himself. She led the way up the stairs, and her hands had already begun to tremble before she even touched the doorknob. The east wing hadn't been opened in 6 years. No one had ordered it locked. It had simply stopped being opened, the way people stopped speaking a certain name. Marisol turned the key, and the smell that rushed out was the smell of time standing still, of covered fabric and air no one had breathed. Every piece of furniture in both rooms lay beneath white sheets, and in the hallway light they looked like a line of people bowing their heads. She pulled the sheet from the first bed, and dust rose in a small, blinding cloud. She worked quickly, her hands still shaking, and she didn't allow herself to think about what she was doing until many hours later. Dr. Wendell Pike arrived at 11:56, 15 minutes earlier than Ryan had given him, carrying 2 medical bags and the expression of a man who had learned long ago that some questions only shortened your life. He didn't ask who the 2 women were. He didn't ask why they weren't at Rush or Northwestern. 4 years earlier, Ryan Ferrante had made something disappear that could have cost Pike his medical license and his freedom. And ever since then, Pike had understood that what he owed couldn't be repaid with money. He went upstairs and closed the door behind him. Ryan didn't follow. He stood in the hallway, just to the left of the door, and he remained there. Water dripped from his coat onto the hardwood floor, first forming a small puddle, then spreading into a larger one, and he didn't take the coat off. From inside the room came the sounds of equipment, Pike giving Marisol brief instructions, footsteps moving back and forth. In the hallway, there was only the clock. The 18-room house had always been silent, but tonight its silence possessed a different quality, the feeling of something being awakened before it had decided how to respond. Near 2 in the morning, Ozzy came upstairs to find him. He stood across from Ryan with his arms folded, and he spoke in the voice he used only when there was no choice but to speak. "Rye, I need you to hear this with your head, not with whatever else is happening to you tonight. You just brought 2 strangers into your house. No names in our system, no background checks. We don't know where they came from, who's been near them, or who might be looking for them. In 19 years, I've never allowed that to happen once, and you've never told me to allow it." Ryan didn't take his eyes off the door. "And there's a second thing," Ozzy said. 3 cameras on Randolph. I told you while we were there, but you didn't listen. So I'm telling you again. People are watching you. Not the federal government. Worse than the federal government. Because the federal government has to get a warrant, and the other side doesn't. South Loop is hanging over your head, and the lenders are counting every day. If there's footage tonight of you kneeling in an alley and bringing 2 unidentified women back to Kenilworth, I can't control what kind of story that footage becomes." He paused. "I'm not asking why you did it. I'm only telling you the price." "Noted," Ryan said. Ozzy remained there a moment longer, then went back downstairs. Ryan stayed where he was. At 4 in the morning, Marisol passed by carrying a basin of water, and she glanced down into the darkened living room below, where a blue upholstered armchair stood slightly crooked from the wall, the only chair in the house that was never covered and that no one ever sat in. She kept walking. At 5:10, the door opened. Pike stepped out, pulling off his gloves, and there was something on his face Ryan had never seen on this man before. It wasn't exhaustion, it was something tighter than that. "The girl will live," Pike said. "Stage 2 hypothermia. We rewarmed her core slowly, no rubbing, no hot fluids into the extremities. They were lucky tonight that the older sister knew the 3 things not to do. The sister is exhausted and dehydrated. She'll sleep until the afternoon at the very least." Ryan nodded and started to turn away. "Ferrante," Pike didn't move. "I pulled the girl's records so I'd know what I was dealing with. I shouldn't be telling you this, but you need to see that girl's medical chart. They went down to the kitchen because it was the only room on the first floor with the lights on." Pike set the tablet on the stone countertop and turned it toward Ryan. "The girl's name is Nova Whitaker, 23 years old, spinal cord injury from a car accident years ago that left her with incomplete paraplegia in the lower thoracic region. The important word is incomplete," he tapped twice. "Years ago, during her initial evaluation, she was considered for spinal decompression surgery. The imaging showed clear compression. 3 physicians reviewed the case. All 3 documented that she was a suitable candidate. 40% chance of partial recovery. Not walking again. Partial recovery means sensation, possibly bladder control, possibly being able to sit upright longer without developing pressure sores. For someone in her condition, 40% is the kind of number people sell their homes to buy." Ryan said nothing. "The surgery never happened," Pike said. "She was moved onto a maintenance protocol. Minimal physical therapy, pain management, follow-up visits every 6 months. For all those years, no one mentioned surgery again. There's no medical note explaining why. No contraindication. No complication. No record that the patient refused." He turned the tablet a little farther. "This is the part I shouldn't be showing you. The denial was signed at the network management level, not by the treating physicians. The entity that signed it was Halloran Medical Group. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen." Ryan stared at the name on the screen longer than necessary. "Are you certain?" "I've been in this profession for 30 years, Pike said. "I see records buried all the time. But they're usually buried because of money, because the insurance company refuses to pay. This isn't like that. The girl had a good employer-sponsored plan at the time. The surgery was covered. Someone chose not to let it happen, then approved their own decision. And because they were both the payer and the reviewer, no one outside the system ever saw a thing." Pike closed the tablet. "That $214,000 is the cost of 4 years of maintenance care. The surgery they denied her would have cost less than that. That's the part that won't let me sleep." Then he left. Ryan sat alone in the brightly lit kitchen until the sky was nearly beginning to pale, and then he opened his phone and sent Ozzy a single line. 10 minutes later, the answer came back. Aurelia Whitaker, 28 years old, former emergency room nurse, married 4 years ago. Husband named Preston Halloran, 31 years old, only son of Benedict and Cordelia Halloran. Ryan read the line 3 times, and what he felt wasn't shock. Shock was for people who still believed in coincidence. What he felt was the collapse of something that had been leaning for a long time. The sensation of hearing a piece click into an empty place he had been circling for months. Because Ryan Ferrante knew the Halloran name very well. Not from the newspapers, and not from photographs taken at fundraising galas. He knew it from the South Loop project. 7 floors already raised, 3 blocks still unfinished, and a $22 million bridge loan from a private fund called Ashfield Credit Partners. A meaningless name anyone could sign without giving it a second thought. 3 months earlier, when Ashfield began tightening the terms and moving the maturity date forward by 9 months, Ryan had ordered his people to peel back every layer and find out who stood behind it. In the end, beneath 3 layers of intermediary companies, the name that emerged was Halloran Family Trust. For 7 months, a family somewhere in Winnetka had been quietly strangling him with paperwork. And tonight he had carried that family's daughter-in-law out of an alley. He stood up. He crossed the dark foyer, past the foot of the staircase, and walked to the last door at the end of the hallway. The study. The desk lamp was already on because Marisol always turned it on, though no one had ever asked her to. Ryan stepped inside and stood there with his hands empty at his sides, while the warm yellow light fell across the walnut desk, where everything remained exactly where it belonged because nothing had been touched. At the right corner, near the edge of the desk, lay a brown leather notebook with a single crack running across its spine and a blue cloth ribbon protruding between the pages near the end. The leather had faded at all 4 corners in the shape of 4 fingers. Dust covered the entire desk except for the space around the notebook, because Marisol wiped that spot clean every week and left the rest untouched. Ryan looked at it. He stood there for a very long time, and he didn't touch it. At last, he turned off the light and walked out. Aurelia woke after 31 hours, and the first thing she did wasn't ask where she was. She lay perfectly still, her eyes still closed, and she counted. Her own heartbeat. 72, a little fast but acceptable. A needle in the back of her left hand, the IV still running. Slow rate. Someone had adjusted it at least once. She could smell antiseptic alcohol and freshly laundered fabric, and she couldn't smell a hospital. No ventilator, no overhead call for a code. No stretcher wheels rattling across vinyl flooring. Only a clock somewhere very far away. Only then did she open her eyes, and she looked up at a ceiling nearly 11.5 feet high, with plaster molding running all the way around it. And she understood at once that wherever she was, it was worse than a hospital. She removed the needle in exactly 3 movements, bent her elbow and pressed it tight, then sat up, and the room made one slow turn before settling into place. Her legs held, barely. She reached the hallway, and the man was standing by the window at the far end, holding a phone with its screen gone dark, and he turned to look at her without showing the slightest surprise. Aurelia recognized him immediately. She had spent 4 years working in an emergency room in a city where every night shift nurse knew certain faces. Not because they read the newspapers. Because at 3 in the morning, some patients came through the back entrance, and there were certain names the attending physician would tell you to document as little as possible before sending you off to do something else. She had heard the name Ferrante whispered in hospital corridors often enough that she didn't need an introduction. "Where's my sister?" "The room next door. She'll live." "The doctor left an hour ago." "Which doctor?" "Wendell Pike." Aurelia knew that name too, and knowing it made everything worse, not better, because Wendell Pike was a spinal surgeon at Rush. And he wasn't the kind of man who appeared at someone's private home at 3 in the morning, unless there was a very specific reason. She walked past Ryan, opened the door to the next room, and looked inside for 30 seconds. Nova was asleep, color restored to her lips, the IV running properly, the blanket pulled up to her chin. Aurelia closed the door gently, the way people only did after doing it 1,000 times. Then she turned back. "We're leaving now," she said. "You were unconscious for 31 hours. I know how long I was out. I'm going to ask you one question, and you're going to answer me directly. What do you want?" "Nothing yet. That's the worst answer you could given." She drew herself upright, and even though she was wearing someone else's clothes, her hair was matted, and she had to brace one hand against the wall to remain standing. She looked at him in a way very few people in his life ever had. I just came out of a house where people fed me in exchange for my silence. 4 years. Good food, beautiful rooms, and every meal came with a bill no one ever printed. I know exactly what a beautiful cage feels like. I'm not trading cages, Mr. Ferrante. Ryan didn't move. The doors aren't locked, he said. No one is standing guard. Bottom of the stairs, turn left, straight outside. You want to leave now, then leave now. He paused for a beat, but your sister can't get herself through that door. And I'm not the one who made that happen. Aurelius stood motionless. She wanted to argue. She had argued with people far better at it than he was for the past 4 years, people in suits with brilliant smiles. And she had lost every time because they always held something she didn't have. He had just named that thing too, but he had said it differently. He had spoken it like a fact, not a weapon. She walked to the top of the stairs. She stood there for 40 seconds. Below her, the foyer was dark and vast, and she could see the front door, a real one, even the brass handle. And beyond the glass panels on either side lay the untouched white snow from that night. She thought about the $22 left in her wallet. She thought about the 3 shelters that had turned them away. She thought about the clock striking in this hallway, and how 40 seconds was long enough for a woman to calculate every move she had left and realize she had none. She turned around. She didn't look at him as she passed. We'll stay until she can sit up, she said. No longer than 1 day, and I'm not going to thank you. Nova woke sometime near noon the following day, and the first thing she said was, "This ceiling is unreasonably high." Aurelia was sitting on the edge of the bed, and she bent down, and for 2 seconds she let her face do what she hadn't allowed it to do for 4 days. Then she straightened again. "Hi," Nova said. "You look like garbage. You look like recycled garbage. So we've moved up in the world." Nova looked around the room, judging each detail with the expression of someone touring a model home. Velvet curtains, brass wall sconces, a wooden cabinet she guessed was worth more than everything the 2 sisters had ever owned put together. "Who did you sell me to?" "Be quiet." "No, seriously, Rel. I wake up in a room with crown molding on the ceiling. People don't kidnap someone like me. I don't even have any kidneys worth taking." The door opened. Ryan stood in the doorway, and he heard that exact word, Rel, heard it fall from the girl's mouth as naturally as a breath. And for one very brief moment he found it strange, because in every file Ozzy had sent him, in every document, that woman's name was Aurelia Whitaker. And for the 4 years before that she had been Mrs. Halloran, and nowhere in the world did anyone call her Rel. Nova looked him up and down for about a second and a half. "Oh," she said. "This is your house, it is, thank you for the bed. It's considerably better than the sidewalk. I give it 8 out of 10, with points deducted because there's no Wi-Fi in sight. There's Wi-Fi." Then 9. Nova pushed herself higher on her elbows, and Aurelia leaned forward to help, and Nova brushed her hand away with the motion of someone who had been brushing away her sister's hand for 6 straight years. "I'm 23 years old," she told Ryan, as though continuing a job interview. "I have a bachelor's degree in languages, studied online as a recent graduate, with a grade point average of 3.9. I work as a freelance translator in Spanish and Portuguese, mostly commercial contracts and technical documents. Last year I made $31,000, and I paid taxes on every cent of it, which I suspect isn't something everyone in this room can say." Ryan's expression didn't change. "I say that," Nova continued, "because people see the wheelchair and immediately start talking more slowly. I like to stop it before it starts." Ryan walked in, pulled over a chair, and sat down at a reasonable distance. "Your wheelchair is downstairs," he said. "The left wheel is still damaged. I haven't let anyone touch it." For the first time, Nova went quiet. "You brought it here?" you asked, so I'm answering. "Yes." She studied him a little longer, and something in her eyes seemed to rearrange itself. Then she asked in a flat voice, with nothing childish left in it, "Do you kill people?" "Nova," Aurelia said. "No, Rel. I want to know where I'm sleeping." Ryan didn't look away. "I give the orders," he said. "Different, but not very different." Nova nodded slowly, like someone receiving the result of a test she had already expected. "At least you don't lie," she said. "Do you know what's really frightening? In 4 years in that house, no one ever told me a direct lie. They just smiled and didn't do anything. That's much worse than you." Aurelia stood and moved toward the bedside cabinet, and she did it too quickly, and both of the others knew why. On top of the cabinet sat a plastic hospital bag containing the things they had been wearing that night. Inside it, neatly folded, was a pair of small blue wool gloves, handmade and worn thin at the fingertips. Nova saw them, and her face tightened. You still kept them. Yes, you sold your coat. Aurelia didn't turn around. A coat is only a coat. You sold your coat at the pawn shop on Halstead for $60. And you spent 4 days walking around in that sweater, Nova said. And there was no humor left in her voice now, and you still kept those gloves. Grandma knitted them for you, Aurelia said. She made them for you when you were 9, and she died the year after that. They weren't something to sell. No one in the room said anything. Then Nova drew in a breath. And when she spoke again, her old voice had returned, sharp and dry and standing firmly on its feet. All right, she said. But next time, sell the gloves, you idiot. I can't even feel when my hands are cold. On the third day, Marisol found her in the laundry room at 7 in the morning, folding towels. Miss Whitaker, that isn't your job, I know. But if I sit still for 1 more hour, I'm going to start thinking. And I don't have time for that. Marisol watched her for a moment, then handed her the second basket. After that, it became a routine. The two women worked together, and for 2 days they said nothing. And then on the 5th day, while pulling the covers from several chairs in the East Wing sitting room, Marisol asked a very small question. Your sister, was she kept in the basement? Aurelia's hands paused for exactly half a beat before she folded the sheet. Who told you? She did. Yesterday. She said it in the same voice someone would use to talk about the weather. That's the part that didn't feel right to me. Aurelia pulled off the next cover. Dust rose into the air. My parents died when I was just a child, she said. An accident on Route 69 left me at 10, and Nova at 5. Our grandmother took us in and brought us to Rockford. She worked nights at a packing plant until her health failed, passing away when I was 19. I chose nursing because I could earn a degree quickly and get a job immediately, because we needed it. I didn't need to love it, she folded the sheet. Years later, Nova was in an accident when she was 17. I had just started working in the emergency room. For the next 2 years, I worked double shifts, and it still wasn't enough. Anyone who has ever calculated the cost of long-term care in Illinois understands. Marisol didn't ask anything. She simply stood there and kept folding. In 2022, I married Preston Halloran, Aurelia said. I know what you're thinking. It wasn't like that. I did care for him. He was kind, he was funny, and he remembered how I took my coffee. I made only one condition before I accepted the ring. Nova came with me. He said yes. His mother said yes too. She pulled off the final cover. The day we moved in, she had already arranged everything. The house had 4 bedrooms on the 2nd floor. She gave Nova the basement room, right beside the laundry room. She said it very gently. She said it would be more convenient for her, that she wouldn't have to go up and down the stairs, that she would have her own entrance to the yard, that everyone would be more comfortable. She said it in front of 6 people, and every one of them nodded because it sounded perfectly reasonable. Marisol didn't nod. I asked to install a stair lift, Aurelia said. The kind that runs along the staircase. $4,000 installed in 1 day. I had the money. I would paid for it myself. She said it would ruin the sightline in the foyer. Those exact words. Sightline. Then she added that the house was in a historic preservation district and that getting permission for renovations would take 8 months. But not to worry, she would submit the application. Aurelia set the sheet down. She never submitted it. I asked again in the 4th month. She said she was waiting for the lawyers to review it. I asked again in the 9th month. She said, you reminded me at just the right time. Let me make a call. By the 2nd year, I stopped asking because I realized I wasn't requesting a lift. I was participating in a game she had already won, and every time I asked, I gave her another chance to appear kind. Marisol spoke softly. That wasn't a refusal. No, Aurelia said. I could fought a refusal. That was delay. You don't strike anyone. You simply leave everything waiting, and while it waits, winter comes. She picked up the basket. That basement was damp. In the spring, water seeped through the bottom of the walls. Nova had pneumonia twice. The 2nd time, she was sick in bed for 4 days, and I slept on the floor beside her. Mrs. Halloran came down once. She stood on the 3rd step and didn't come any farther, and she said, I heard the wheelchair girl is sick. Tell Rosalind if you need anything. Aurelia stopped. 4 years, Mrs. Fuentes. 4 years, and she never once called Nova by her name. It wasn't forgetfulness. Nova is 4 letters. She remembered the neighbor's dog's name. She called her the wheelchair girl. Right in front of her, right in front of me, right in front of the entire dinner table. And everyone kept eating. Marisol said nothing. In the doorway behind them, Ryan stood perfectly still. He had been there since the second sheet. He didn't step inside, and he didn't walk away. And in his hand was the paper Ozzy had given him that morning, and he was no longer looking at it. Marisol asked the final question after they had finished folding everything, and she asked it very softly, like someone who knew exactly where she was touching. "How did they throw you out?" Aurelia stood looking through the window for a while. "The night of February 5th, she said. The annual Halloran Family Trust Gala. A hotel on Michigan Avenue. A small ballroom, 40 guests, all people they knew. Doctors, lawyers, 2 members of the hospital board, 1 city councilwoman. I wore the dress she chose for me because she was still choosing my dresses after 4 years. I stood beside Preston the entire evening. He held my hand when they took the photographs." She stopped. When it was time for the speeches, she took the microphone and thanked everyone. She talked about family, she talked about legacy. Then she looked over at me and said, in that warm voice she used when delivering speeches, that it had been 4 years. And this family needed an heir, not an unemployed nurse and a wheelchair-bound parasite. Marisol stopped breathing. 40 people, Aurelia said. No one dropped a glass. No one coughed. That's the part I remember most, you know. The politeness. People only turned away slightly, as though I were changing clothes and they were trying to be discreet. She continued staring through the window. I didn't look at her. I looked at Preston. He was standing 16 inches away from me. His hand was still warm where it had been holding mine, and I started counting. Marisol didn't ask why. 1, he heard it. I knew he heard it because his jaw moved. 2, 3, he drew in a breath. He really did breathe in. I saw his shoulders rise. That was the closest he came. 4, 5, his shoulders lowered. 6, 7. Someone at the table behind us laughed quietly because they thought it was a joke. 8, 9, he began looking down. 10, 11, she paused. 11 seconds, Mrs. Fuentes. Then he looked down at his shoes and never raised his head again. She moved on to thanking the sponsors. The music started again. People went to get dessert. Marisol spoke softly. What did you do? I stood there. I was still holding my glass. I didn't pour it over anyone's head. I didn't scream. Looking back, I'm grateful for that. Not because I was noble. Because I knew immediately that if I made a scene, the story would change subjects, and the subject would become me. She placed her hand on the windowsill. We got home at 10:30. I opened the door, and there were 7 cardboard boxes in the foyer, already packed, sealed with tape, names written on them in marker. My things, Nova's things, even her computer, even the charging outlet for her chair. Someone had folded my clothes properly, the way stores do it. I can't fold clothes like that, she breathed in. 40 guests heard her say those words, and while we were still standing there listening, someone had already been packing our belongings at the house for 3 hours, which meant the speech wasn't spontaneous. The speech was an announcement. The decision had already been signed, and the gala was simply where they read the sentence aloud so there would be witnesses. Outside, the snow began falling again. Nova was waiting in the foyer, wearing her coat, sitting beside her boxes. No one had told her anything. She saw the boxes herself and put on her coat. She had been sitting there for 2 hours, Aurelia continued, her voice flat. We made it to the gate. The street was empty. And Nova said, Rel, I'm sorry I exist. Marisol raised a hand to her mouth. I slapped her hand, Aurelia said. Not hard. Just enough to startle her. I told her, don't ever let me hear you say that again. I had never hurt her before. I startled her once in her entire life, and it was because of that sentence. She turned to look at Marisol. 4 days, Mom. I left that house with a little over $100 in my purse. The first night, we stayed at a motel on Cicero, which cost $89, leaving us with almost nothing. The second night, I called 11 places. Every family shelter was full. In February in Chicago, that wasn't unusual. 2 places still had beds, but both were on the 2nd floor with no elevator. And one told me directly that they didn't accept electric wheelchairs because of fire regulations and lithium batteries. Nova's chair is a regular manual chair, but the person answering the phone didn't know the difference. And I didn't have enough time to explain it to every one of them, she continued. By the 3rd night, we were completely broke, so I sold my coat at a pawn shop on Halstead for $60. We used none of it for a room. Instead, we slept in a hospital waiting room until security asked us to leave at 4 a.m. He apologized. He was kind. He still asked us to leave. She picked up the last basket. The 4th night was the 9th. We had $22 left from the coat money. The city declared an emergency at 8 that evening, and we were in the West Loop because I thought a crowded neighborhood would be safer. By 9:30, there wasn't anyone left on the street. Nova told me, "Sit down, Rel, you've been standing for 4 days." I said, "All right, only 15 minutes." She walked toward the door. Then I sat down. Ozzy came home at 11 o'clock the following night, and he entered through the kitchen door, something he never did. Ryan heard a chair scrape across the floor, and when he came downstairs, he found Ozzy sitting on the edge of the table, his coat thrown on the floor, his left hand pressed hard against his right upper arm through the dark fabric. Something had happened in Cicero. A meeting that was supposed to be nothing more than a conversation. And someone there had decided it wasn't going to remain a conversation, and everything had ended in roughly 40 seconds. Ozzy had walked out on his own feet. The other man hadn't, but that belonged to the other side of the city, and Ryan would deal with it in the morning. "Call Pike," Ryan said. "He's in Milwaukee. 3 hours, then 3 hours. In 3 hours, I'll still be sitting here, and this arm will be ruined." Footsteps sounded at the doorway. Aurelia stood there in a sweater, her hair tied back, and she studied Ozzy's arm for exactly 2 seconds with the same look she had used thousands of times at 3 in the morning in the emergency room. A look with no emotion in it, only triage. "Soft tissue tear, not a vessel," she said. "You're still speaking in complete sentences, and your face isn't pale. If it were an artery, after the last 10 minutes, you wouldn't still be sitting upright like that." Ozzy looked at her. "Who are you to make that call? 4 years in the emergency room at Mercy. Do you want me to stitch it, or do you want to sit here for 3 hours while the wound tears farther open and infection works its way into the muscle?" Ryan said nothing. Ozzy looked at his boss, then back at her, then muttered a very quiet curse and held out his arm. She worked quickly. She told Marisol to boil water, told Ryan to open the medicine cabinet in the first-floor bathroom, told Ozzy to keep his mouth shut and sit still. The medical kit Pike had left behind was still untouched in its bag on top of the refrigerator. She washed her hands up to the elbows in the kitchen sink for exactly 2 minutes, not 1 second less. She put on gloves. She lowered the desk lamp and adjusted its angle 3 times until the shadow fell exactly where she wanted it. She administered a local anesthetic, waited the proper amount of time, tested with the tip of the needle, then waited longer. Then she began stitching. Ryan stood at the far end of the kitchen, leaning against the cabinet column, and watched. He had seen every kind of person in every kind of room. He had seen men as hard as stone come apart because a telephone rang. He had seen the hands of people who were paid a great deal of money to keep those hands from trembling, and they trembled anyway. This woman's hands didn't tremble. It wasn't that she was forcing them not to. They simply didn't, like a hinge that never thought to squeak. She counted softly aloud for herself. 12, 13, 14. She stopped at the 16th stitch to wipe the area and reposition the lamp, then continued. Ozzy asked her a question to distract himself, asked which department she had worked in at Mercy, and she answered briefly. And Ryan noticed that she answered in the exact rhythm between 2 passes of the needle. Not early, not late. 22 stitches. She tied the final knot, cut the thread, dressed the wound, and removed her gloves by turning them inside out from the wrists exactly as the textbooks taught. For 48 hours, don't lift anything heavier than 5 pounds. If your temperature rises above 100.4 degrees Fahrenheit, or you see a red streak traveling up toward your shoulder, that's sepsis, not fatigue. And at that point, you don't wait for Pike to come back from Milwaukee. She washed her hands a second time, switched off the desk lamp, and walked out of the kitchen without looking at Ryan even once. 2 men remained in the kitchen with a table marked by streaks of water. Ozzy sat still, testing the movement of his fingers, while Ryan remained exactly where he had been. He was thinking about something. For the past 6 days, he had looked at that woman as someone who had been pulled out of the snow. In his mind, she was the consequence of an event, something he had picked up. But the person who had just stood beneath that lamp wasn't something that had been picked up. She was a craftsman. She had guided a needle through 4 years of night shifts, through 6 years of caring for her sister, through 4 years of sitting at a table with people who called her sister the wheelchair girl. And her hands still didn't tremble. The snow in that alley hadn't made her. It had only nearly taken her away. Rye. Ozzy was still looking at the doorway she had just passed through. "She isn't afraid of you," he said. "Did you notice?" Ryan didn't answer. "I've walked beside you for 19 years, Ozzy said. Everyone who enters a room with you changes the way they breathe. Doctors do. Judges do. She just held a blade in your house, ordered you to open the medicine cabinet, and she never changed her rhythm once. He folded his sleeve back down. I don't know what that means. But you should know that it's real. Theodora Ferrante arrived at 9 o'clock the following morning, without warning, and she kept her coat on because she didn't intend to stay long. 34 years old, her hair tied low, carrying a black leather briefcase, she was the only person in the world who could enter this house without Ozzy needing to ask questions. She set the briefcase on the desk in the study, opened it, and removed a stack of papers. I need 2 minutes of your time, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything. Ryan sat down. Ashfield Credit Partners moved the maturity date from November to February. You already know that. What you don't know is that the day before yesterday, they filed an additional notice claiming a technical covenant violation on Block B. Not because you missed a payment. You haven't missed a single dollar. They invoked the completion schedule clause, the one no one ever enforces because it's absurd, but it's in the contract you signed. She pushed the document toward him. That means they don't want the money. They want the project. 7 floors already built, and 3 blocks still unfinished. If you breach the terms, they take the entire thing for 50 cents on the dollar. This is a planned asset seizure, and whoever wrote this plan understands construction, understands the way to restructure capital, and has time. Ryan didn't touch the paper. Now we get to the interesting part, Teddy said. I read the file Ozzy sent. The woman sleeping on the 2nd floor of your house spent 4 years as Benedict and Cordelia Halloran's daughter-in-law. She ate more than 1,000 meals with them. She knows how that family operates, who calls whom, who makes which decisions. And her sister is a buried medical case with dates and a network-level signature. She sat in the chair across from him. Ryan, the people strangling you just threw 2 witnesses onto the sidewalk with their own hands in the middle of a snowstorm. In 20 years of doing this work, I've never seen a gift this large, she continued, her voice still even. I don't need her to testify in court. I don't even need her to want to help. I only need a sworn statement about what she heard in that house over 4 years, along with her sister's medical records. And 2 calls to the right people. I give that to the insurance company's compliance department, and to a lawyer I know at the state attorney general's office, not to file a lawsuit, only to have them start asking questions. Halloran will have to pull its hands away from South Loop for 6 weeks to put its own house in order. You keep the project. No one gets hurt. No one goes to prison. This is the cleanest solution I've ever proposed to you. She tapped the file once with her finger. Use her. Ryan said nothing. Teddy waited. She was his sister. She had been reading him since she was 7 years old, and she knew every kind of silence he had. There was the silence that meant the decision had already been made, and the next question would be when. There was the silence that meant he was calculating a third path. This silence belonged to neither kind. He was looking through the window, and he wasn't calculating anything at all. Ryan, she said. There was no answer. Ryan, I just told you how to keep $22 million, and you're not listening to me. I'm listening. Then give me one word. He turned and looked at her. Let me think. Teddy sat motionless. In the 18 years she had served as this family's attorney, she had heard her brother say do it, say no, say wait until Tuesday, say let it go, it isn't worth it. She had never, not once, heard him say let me think. She closed her briefcase very slowly. You know I'm right, she said. You know it, and if you don't use her, you lose Block B in February, you lose the rest in April. And by then she'll still have nothing more than she has today. You don't save anyone by losing. She picked up her coat. I'll be at the peninsula until Friday. Then she left. Ryan remained alone in the study while the morning light moved across the walnut desk. He sat there for a very long time. Then he reached toward the right corner of the desk and pulled the brown leather notebook toward him. He hadn't opened it once in 6 years. He did now, slowly, with both hands, and the cracked spine made a dry sound like a breaking branch. The blue ribbon lay somewhere near the end, but he didn't turn that far. He opened to a random page in the middle. Slanted handwriting, blue ink, written in haste, a single line at the top of the page before a list of 3 names he didn't recognize. You keep thinking the difficult part is making the decision. The difficult part is staying after you've made it. Ryan read it 3 times. He didn't read another line. He closed the notebook, returned it to the same corner, to the exact place Marisol always cleaned, and he didn't write anything. Aurelia waited for Pike at the door when he came to change Ozzy's dressing, and she stopped him in the foyer. "You were able to pull Nova's medical records," she said, "so you can pull mine." Pike looked at her. "You understand that I'm not allowed to. You weren't allowed to last week either. I'm only asking you not to be allowed one more time." She held out a small piece of paper with 3 lines written on it. "Lakeview Fertility Center, March of 2023, Dr. Rennick. I went through 3 rounds of testing there over 14 months. I never saw a single result with my own eyes." Pike paused. "You never saw your own test results?" "She took me there." She sat in the waiting room. The results were sent to the family physician, and the family physician called her, and she repeated them to me. For 4 years, I lived on what she chose to repeat. Pike took the piece of paper. He said nothing else. The following afternoon, he returned, and he wasn't carrying his medical bag, and that was the first thing Aurelia noticed. They sat in the study because it was the only room with a door that could be closed. Ryan stood at the window. Pike placed 2 sets of printed documents on the desk, one thin and one thick. "You can read medical records," he said, "so I'm not going to interpret them for you. I'll only tell you that you should read the thin one first." Aurelia opened the thin file, 3 pages. Her test results from March of 2023. Normal ovarian reserve, normal hormone levels, both fallopian tubes open on hysterosalpingography. At the bottom of the 3rd page was Dr. Rennick's typed conclusion with an electronic signature. "No female abnormality detected. Male evaluation recommended." She sat perfectly still. "The thick one," Pike said. She opened it. Preston Halloran's semen analysis results. 3 tests, from April and June of 2022 and January of 2023. Sperm concentration far below the critical threshold. Motility below 5%. The diagnosis was written clearly. Primary male infertility. The likelihood of natural conception was nearly 0. On the final page was an administrative note dated May 12, 2022, stating that the patient's file had been moved to restricted storage at the request of the network medical director, and beneath it was the signature. Benedict Halloran. "Your records weren't buried," Pike said quietly. "They were switched. Both sets of results were in the Halloran system, because both of you were seen at facilities within their network. Someone with the highest level of authority pulled Preston's file out of the normal workflow and locked it away. After that, the family physician could only see your records, and your records were normal, but normal without a comparison is what they call unexplained infertility. Even with your medical background, you wouldn't have questioned it because you trusted your husband, and every external lab they sent you to was quietly controlled by his father's network." He stopped. "That's the phrase they used with you, isn't it?" "Unexplained infertility," Aurelia said. 4 years. She set the documents down on the desk. She didn't cry. She didn't say anything. She only sat there with both hands resting in her lap, her eyes fixed on the walnut desktop, and not a single muscle in her face moved. Pike waited 2 minutes, then quietly left and closed the door behind him. Ryan didn't leave. He remained at the window and didn't say a word. Because of all the things he knew how to do in this world, he knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't the moment for a man to open his mouth. 20 minutes passed. The clock in the hallway struck twice. The light beyond the window shifted from white to gray. Aurelia sat motionless like someone replaying a very long film from the beginning, watching all 4 years again. Every meal, every time Cordelia placed a hand over hers at the dinner table and said, "We just have to be patient, my dear." Every night Aurelia lay in the dark, wondering what was wrong with her body. Every time she watched Preston sleeping and thought, "Poor man, he married me." Every time she apologized. She had apologized so many times. She was counting them again. Then she spoke, and her voice was completely normal, and that was the most frightening part. "Can you destroy them?" Ryan didn't turn around immediately. "What does destroy mean?" "It means she no longer has that trust. It means he no longer has a single clinic where he can sign his name. It means the Halloran name can't open another door anywhere in this city." Ryan turned, he looked at her, and he answered as though responding to a technical question, because to him, that was exactly what it was. 3 days, Aurelia didn't blink. Outside, a tree branch tapped against the glass. She remained seated for one more beat, one very long beat. Don't, she said again, and this time she looked up. "Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. If I let you do that, then I become exactly what they always said I was. a woman who survives by borrowing another man's power. For 4 years, she said I was living off her family. If I walk out of her house and go straight into yours and use your hands, then she was right. She was wrong about everything else, but she'll have been right about me. And she'll be right forever, and I'll know it until the day I die. Ryan said nothing. There's something else, she said. You destroy them in 3 days, and they collapse in 3 days. But no one knows why. People will say the Halorans made bad business decisions. They'll say they crossed the wrong person. Nova's file will still sit untouched in the system. No one will review it. No one will ask why a 19-year-old girl who qualified for surgery was denied it. Next year, there'll be another network, another child, and they'll sign the same way again, because that signature was never dragged into the light. It was only smashed apart by some man stronger than they were. That isn't justice. That's a traffic accident. She stood and picked up both sets of records. I'm going to do this my way. It'll be slow, it'll be ugly, and I may lose. But if I win, it'll be written on stamped paper, and paper doesn't die with the person. The following morning, she sat at the kitchen table at 6 o'clock with the computer she had borrowed from Nova, and she began. First, she filed a complaint with the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, the agency responsible for regulating medical licenses in the state, accusing Dr. Benedict Haloran of altering and restricting access to patient records in order to conceal a diagnosis, attaching the file numbers, the dates, and a photograph of the page bearing his own signature. She spent 4 hours writing the complaint and rewrote it 3 times, because she knew that a complaint written in anger was a complaint sent to the bottom of the pile. The final version didn't contain a single adjective. Second, she submitted another complaint to the compliance division of the insurance company that had paid for Nova's care, because when a medical network was both the party approving treatment and the party benefiting from its denial, it was no longer only a medical issue, it was a financial one, and money was the only thing that made insurance companies move. Third, she called the newsroom of the Chicago Tribune and asked for one specific person, an investigative reporter who had written a series about private clinics in the suburbs 3 years earlier. She said exactly 4 sentences over the phone, then went silent. The reporter asked her to repeat herself, and she said, "I have the original records." The reporter arranged to meet her for coffee in River North on Thursday. Fourth, she called Theodora Ferrante. Teddy arrived at 2 in the afternoon and sat down with the expression of someone who already knew what she was about to hear. She had heard it from her brother. "You understand that I work for my brother, I understand. I'm not hiring you for your brother. I'm hiring you for me." Teddy raised an eyebrow. "Hiring me, yes. I want a legal services agreement with my name on it, billed by the hour, with invoices. I know what you charge per hour, and I can't afford to pay you in money. So I'll pay you in work." She pushed across a page she had written by hand that morning. "Anywhere your office has medical records, I can review them. I can read a chart faster than any assistant you're paying. $70 an hour. I know which notes are real and which ones were written to protect against litigation. And I've sat through enough case conferences to know how a doctor lies. I'll work for you 20 hours a week until the debt is paid. If you think I'm too slow, fire me." Teddy sat motionless for a long time. Then she laughed, a short sound with nothing amused in it. "Do you know that last week I sat in that chair and suggested using you as a witness? I assumed as much. My brother didn't agree. He said, 'Let me think. I've been this family's attorney for 18 years, and I've never heard him say those words.'" Teddy picked up the page and read it carefully. "And now you're sitting here refusing something half this city would gladly lose a finger to have. Then you insist on paying me." With labor, she set the page down. "Miss Whitaker, I grew up in the Ferrante family. I've never met anyone who refused us and remained sitting safely in the same chair." "Now you have," Aurelia said. "Are you accepting or not?" Teddy opened her briefcase and removed a blank contract. $380 an hour, she said. "I don't give discounts to anyone, including people I like. Sign here." In the study at the far end of the hallway, Ryan Ferrante sat alone. He had heard everything. Outside, snow was falling again, the small, lazy snow of mid-February, and he sat there with both hands empty on the desktop. For 37 years, everyone who came to him came to ask him to do something. This was the first time in his life anyone had come to ask him to do nothing at all, and he discovered that it was the hardest thing anyone had ever asked of him. 9 days after the complaint was filed, Preston Halloran stood outside the gates of the Kenilworth house at 7 o'clock in the evening. Ozzy went down first, and he didn't open the gate, Miss Whittaker. He said over the intercom, "There's a man named Preston Halloran outside. He isn't carrying anything. He's alone. His car is parked on the street with the engine still running." Aurelia remained silent for 4 seconds. "Let him in." Ryan said nothing as she crossed the foyer. He only rose from his chair and walked into the hallway, and he stood exactly 3 steps from the door of the small sitting room, and he remained there for the next 22 minutes. Preston entered the room and didn't remove his coat. 31 years old, tall, his hair neatly combed, and he had lost weight. And Aurelia noticed it immediately because the collar of his shirt was an inch looser than it had been the month before. He looked at her, and for the first 2 seconds something passed across his face, something resembling relief, as though he had just confirmed that she was still alive, and it made her want to vomit. "May I sit down? Say what you came to say." He sat on the edge of the chair. He placed both hands on his knees, then took them away again. "My father received a letter from the licensing agency on Tuesday," he said. "They've opened a preliminary investigation. The insurance company sent a letter too. 2 companies have postponed signing their network contract renewals. Yesterday, St. Aloysius Hospital removed my father's name from its advisory board. They didn't call him. They simply took his name off the website." He swallowed. "My mother had to cancel the April event. 3 sponsors withdrew. She hasn't left her room in 3 days." Aurelia said nothing. "And the reporter," he said. "Someone from the Tribune called 3 members of the foundation board this week. I know she called because someone told me. Do you understand what happens when a newspaper like that starts making calls? They haven't printed anything yet. They're only calling. And that's enough." He looked up. "Aurelia, I'm begging you." She still said nothing. "Withdraw the complaint," he said. "Tell them you were mistaken. Tell them you were going through a difficult time, that you weren't thinking clearly anything. I'll take care of you. I'll take care of Nova, too. I'll pay all the medical debt, all $214,000. I have the money. I'll pay it this week. I'll rent a home for both of you, anywhere you want, with an elevator you choose. I'll sign whatever papers you want. But you have to withdraw the complaint," he began, speaking faster. "If my father loses his license, the network collapses. 400 employees. It isn't only my father, do you understand? 400 people work there. My mother's foundation provides scholarships for 120 children every year. That entire house will collapse, Aurelia. All of it will come down." She let those words remain in the room for a while. Then she spoke very slowly. "You haven't apologized to me," Preston faltered. "You came in here, you've been talking for 10 minutes, and you've named every person who will suffer because of me. You haven't said you're sorry even once. Do you know why? Because apologizing would mean admitting that something happened. And you still believe that what's happening now is something I caused." He opened his mouth. "You know I'm not infertile, don't you?" His mouth closed. "In April of 2023 you went for testing," she said. "Then again in June. Then again in January of the following year. 3 times. You received the results. You held them in your hands. And for the next 4 years you sat at that dinner table and listened to your mother tell me, 'We just had to be patient, my dear. Women's bodies can be unpredictable.' You sat there. You finished everything on your plate." Preston looked down. "She made me," he said very quietly. "My father locked the records. I didn't know until—" He stopped, and the place where he stopped revealed more than the sentence he had meant to finish. Aurelia nodded once. "You knew," she said. "All right." She stood. "Now listen carefully. On the night of February 5th, your mother held a microphone and said those words in front of 40 people, and you were standing 16 inches away from me. I counted, Preston. I counted from the moment she finished speaking until you lowered your eyes to your shoes. 11 seconds. You had 11 seconds, and during those 11 seconds, I was still your wife, and you made your choice." He didn't look up. "And my sister spent 4 years in that basement," she said. "I counted that too. 1,462 days. She had pneumonia twice. You walked past the basement door every morning on your way to the car. She went to the door and opened it. Don't talk to me about your family's house collapsing." Preston remained seated for a while, then he stood, walked to the doorway and stopped, and he saw Ryan Ferrante standing in the dark hallway with both hands in his trouser pockets, saying nothing, not moving. And he understood immediately that the man had been standing there for the entire 22 minutes and had done nothing at all. And for some reason, that frightened him more than everything he had ever heard about the Ferrante name. 6 days later, a man in a windbreaker stood at the gate at 10 in the morning and handed Ozzy a brown envelope. He wasn't a police officer. He was a process server, paid $45 for each delivery, and he was polite, and he asked Ozzy to sign for it before driving away. Teddy opened the envelope in the kitchen and read it in silence, and Aurelia looked at her face and knew at once that something was wrong. Teddy finished the 3rd page, then set the papers down on the table very gently, as though they might break. "Sit down," she said. "Tell me, Cordelia Halloran has just filed a petition with the Cook County Probate Court. Guardianship Court." Teddy drew in a breath. "She's asking the court to declare Nova Whitaker a disabled adult in need of protection and appoint a guardian for her." Aurelia stood. "She has no right. She isn't related to my sister by blood. Sit down and listen until I'm finished, because this is the part you'll misunderstand if you listen through your anger." Teddy tapped one finger against the papers. "She isn't asking to become the guardian. There isn't a single line in here asking for any authority for herself. In Illinois, any interested person can file a petition. An old friend, a neighbor. She only has to say she's concerned about someone she lived with for 4 years. That's true. No one can dispute it. Then what is she asking for? She's asking the court to appoint an independent professional guardian." Teddy let the words fall between them. "Do you know what that is? They're companies whose business is guardianship. They're real, legal, licensed. When the court decides that a disabled person has no one capable of caring for them, it appoints a company like that. The company sends someone in. That person controls decisions about where the ward lives, medical care, and finances. They sign on the ward's behalf. They open separate accounts. They pay themselves service fees from the ward's own money." Aurelia sat down. "She nominated a company in the petition," Teddy said. "She has the right to nominate one, and the court doesn't have to follow her recommendation, but judges often do because their dockets are overloaded. The company is called Northgate Fiduciary Services. It took me 20 minutes to trace it. According to Northgate's own publicly available tax records, its largest donor for 3 consecutive years was the Halloran Family Trust." No one in the kitchen seemed to breathe. "There's nothing illegal in that," Teddy said. "Not a single line. She hasn't bribed anyone. She hasn't concealed anything. The donations are publicly listed on a nonprofit organization's tax return, and anyone can look them up. She's simply the right people. That's how it works. There are no fingerprints to find." Aurelia spoke very quietly. "The grounds. What reasons did she give?" Teddy turned the page. 3 reasons. First, the patient's only relative, meaning you, currently has no permanent residence and hasn't had a registered address since February 5th. Second, you've been unemployed since 2022, with no income and no health insurance. Third, Teddy stopped. "Third," Aurelia said. "Third, you and the proposed ward are currently residing at the private home of Mr. Ryan Ferrante in Kenilworth, an individual who is the subject of multiple ongoing federal investigations." And she cites concerns for the safety of a disabled adult in that environment. Teddy pushed the paper across the table. She attached photographs, 3 of them, taken from the cameras on Randolph on the night of February 9th. The quality is poor, but it's enough. One shows him carrying Nova to the car. Aurelia stared at the blurred printed photograph. "Do you understand now?" Teddy said. "She isn't attacking you. She isn't attacking my brother. She's simply taken the truth, every part of it true, and arranged it in the correct order. You really don't have a home. You really are unemployed. You really are living in the house of a crime boss. There isn't a single lie in these 31 pages." Aurelia set the photograph down. "And if she wins?" Teddy answered without hesitation. "If she wins, Northgate controls Nova. Not you anymore. They decide where she lives. They decide where she receives medical care, and they'll send her back into the same network because they'll do whatever is most convenient. They control her accounts. And," she said, "when someone is placed under guardianship, that outsprings testimony in every other proceeding can be challenged on the grounds of capacity. Nova is the only living witness to 4 years inside that house. Cordelia doesn't need to silence her. She only needs to make her words seem unreliable." Teddy looked directly into Aurelia's eyes. "And you, a woman accusing a physician of misconduct, will be described in a court record as homeless, unemployed, dependent on an organized crime figure. and stripped by the court itself of the right to care for your own sister. You can decide for yourself what happens to your complaint before the licensing agency after that. A sound came from the doorway. Ryan stood there. He had heard everything from the beginning, and in that moment, everything he possessed, 19 years of power, 3 judges who answered his calls after midnight, $22 million. The name that made people change the way they breathed. All of it became the most useless thing in the world, because the most powerful weapon Cordelia Halloran now held in her hands, the thing printed on page 17 of that petition with 3 photographs attached, was him. It took Ryan 2 days to find the apartment, and he found it through 3 layers of companies so that his name appeared nowhere. Ravenswood, 4th floor, 2 bedrooms, in a building constructed in 1920 with an elevator whose internal system had been replaced the year before. The landlord was a retired teacher who knew no one and owed no one. The lease was in Aurelia Whitaker's name, 6 months, the rent paid from her own account. And the amount she paid was the real amount, because Teddy had checked market rates for the entire block, to make certain no one could uncover even a single subsidized dollar. "You need an address before the first hearing," Teddy said. Without an address, her first argument stands, and the first argument is the leg holding the chair up. The second task took 3 days. Aurelia applied to return to work in the emergency department at Northwestern Memorial. Her nursing license was still active because she had continuously paid the renewal fees during her marriage, even though she hadn't worked a single day, a detail she had maintained out of habit at the time, and that now saved her. The third task was Ryan's. On Saturday morning, he told Ozzy to prepare the car. No one asked who was going where. Marisol packed food into containers, and she packed more than necessary, and no one said anything about it. Nova reached the foyer first, and Ozzy pushed her toward the car, and at the door she stopped. "You know we aren't going to thank you, right?" she said. "It's a family tradition, I know. Good." She pulled on the blue wool gloves 1 finger at a time, slowly, and Ryan saw them and said nothing. Aurelia came down last. She stood in the foyer with her 1 bag, while the 18-room house remained silent around her, and the east wing had been covered again the day before, because Marisol couldn't bear to look at it empty. The 2 of them stood at the door. "You won't come to court," Aurelia said. "No, you won't call anyone. You won't send a message to any judge. None of your people will sit in the back row." "No, and if I lose, then you lose," Ryan said. "But if I'm there, you lose for certain. Page 17 is me. As long as I remain in the frame, she doesn't need to prove anything else. She only has to point." Aurelia looked at him. "You understand what's happening, don't you? You've just been stripped of the only thing you have. I understand. People will say you're afraid. People can say whatever they want." She was silent for a while. Outside, the sky was gray and damp, the kind of late February weather that was no longer beautiful. "I can't fix you," she said. "You know that, don't you? I'm not the kind of person who walks into the life of a man like you, and suddenly everything gets better. I have a court petition and a sister and nothing else. I can't fix you, I know," Ryan said. She walked out to the car. He stood at the door until the vehicle disappeared, and then he remained there a little longer. That night, he sat in the study without turning on the light. He hadn't allowed himself to think about it in 6 years, and now he couldn't stop, because the house had become silent again in exactly the old way. November of 2020. The underground parking garage beneath the office building on Wacker Drive. He was 15 minutes late for a meeting because of a phone call. Katrina went down ahead of him. She said, "Let me bring the car around. You come down and we can still make dinner." She was holding the keys. He remembered the sound of her heels against the concrete. The sound growing farther away, steady 14 steps, and afterward he counted them 1,000 times in his mind. Then he remembered the sound. He didn't remember any image at all. His mind had cut that part away and kept only the sound. And for 6 years he had lived with one sound, and the impossibly long silence that followed it. The silence in which he still didn't know. The final silence of his life in which he was still a man with a wife. They had come looking for him. They had only arrived in the wrong place by 15 minutes. Afterward, Ryan Ferrante did what a man in his position had to do. And he did it coldly and thoroughly, and no one in this city had dared mention it again. But he had learned something that night, and he had never spoken it aloud to anyone. Everything he touched eventually stopped breathing, not because he wanted it to, because he was there. Because there was a kind of man whose mere presence beside someone was enough to turn that person into a target. And he was that kind of man, and he had been that kind of man since he was 22. For 6 years, he had solved that problem in the simplest way possible. He stood beside no one. 18 rooms, furniture beneath covers, one blue upholstered chair set slightly crooked from the wall that no one ever sat in. Now there were 2 women in Ravenswood, and his name appeared on page 17 of a court petition. And for the first time in Ryan Ferrante's life, the only way he could protect someone was to disappear from theirs. He sat in the darkness for a very long time. At the right corner of the desk, the brown leather notebook remained exactly where it had always been. He didn't touch it. On a crisp morning weeks later, Courtroom 1804, Cook County Court, Probate and Guardianship Division. The Honorable Harlan Voss presiding. The room was smaller than people imagined. Low ceiling, fluorescent lights, 14 rows of benches, and only 9 people seated. No reporters. No one from the Ferrante organization in the back row. Aurelia had checked 3 times herself, and hadn't found a single familiar face. And that was both exactly what she wanted, and exactly what made it hard for her to breathe. Cordelia Halloran arrived 15 minutes early. She wore gray wool, no jewelry except her wedding ring, and low-heeled shoes. She sat with her back straight, both hands folded in her lap, and she didn't look toward Aurelia even once. Her attorney was a man in his 60s named Whitfield, with a slow voice that never rose once during the entire 2 hours. Teddy presented first. She spoke for exactly 13 minutes, and didn't waste a single word. The proposed ward was Nova Whitaker, 23 years old, holder of a bachelor's degree, with fully reported taxable income for 3 consecutive years, a bank account she managed herself, no diagnosis of cognitive impairment, and no record of being unable to make decisions concerning her own affairs. Teddy submitted 3 affidavits from translation clients. She submitted tax records. She submitted a letter from Nova's treating physician, confirming that her spinal cord injury had no effect on her cognitive function. She said the standard in Illinois wasn't whether this person faced inconvenience, but whether this person had lost the capacity to make decisions. And she repeated that guardianship was the most restrictive measure the laws of this state could impose on an adult citizen, and that the court could use it only when no less restrictive alternative remained. Judge Voss took notes. He nodded twice. Then Whitfield stood, and everything began to slip. He didn't dispute a single word. He said his client fully agreed that Miss Nova Whitaker was a young woman of exceptional intellectual ability, and that this was precisely what made the situation so painful. Then he began to read. On February 5th, the proposed ward left her last registered residence. From February 5th through February 9th, she had no place of residence. On the night of February 9th, during a weather emergency declared by the city, the proposed ward was documented as suffering from stage 2 hypothermia in an alley off Randolph Street. There was no emergency room record, no ambulance was called, no hospital admitted her. Whitfield paused in exactly the right place. Your Honor, I'm not accusing anyone. I'm only asking the court one question. A 23-year-old woman suffered stage 2 hypothermia, and not a single line in this state's medical system records what happened that night. So who treated her, where was she treated, and why did no one call 911? He placed 3 printed photographs on the clerk's table. Aurelia heard the sound of paper touching wood. From February 9th until February 28th, both sisters resided at the private home of Mr. Ryan Ferrante in Kenilworth. I'll make no comment regarding Mr. Ferrante. I'm merely entering into the record public news reports and 2 ongoing federal proceedings, and I'll allow the court to draw its own conclusions. Then he turned to Aurelia. No income from 2022 to the present. No health insurance. A lease signed only 4 months earlier. A job application submitted only 4 months earlier, with the probationary period not yet completed. Currently the complainant in an administrative action against her former husband's family. A proceeding which Mrs. Halloran, he said in a sorrowful voice, had deliberately not mentioned in her petition because she didn't want the court to believe this was personal. Voss looked up. Mrs. Halloran, he said. Would you like to say anything? Cordelia stood. She held no papers. Your Honor, I'm 62 years old, and I've never stood in a courtroom in my life. That girl lived beneath my roof for 4 years. I'm not asking for any authority for myself. I'm not asking to be appointed guardian. I'm not asking for a single cent of her money. I'm only asking the court to appoint a neutral person, someone who isn't me, someone who isn't her sister, someone with no connection to anyone in this room, to look at how that girl is living. If that person looks and says everything is fine, then I'll go home. And I'll sleep for the first time in 9 months. She paused, and her voice broke just slightly, only slightly. I saw those 3 photographs, Your Honor. I haven't been able to sleep. She sat down. Someone in the room cleared their throat. Voss wrote nothing. He leaned back and looked down at the file for a long time. And Teddy, standing about 13 feet away, read that body language with perfect accuracy, and she set down her pen. Aurelia sat motionless in the front row. Her hands were clasped together in her lap. Her fingernails had been digging into the backs of her hands for 20 minutes, and she couldn't feel a thing. She could see it happening. She could see the way it always happened, not with a fist, but with a kind person speaking in a sorrowful voice and a tired person in a black robe nodding because it sounded reasonable. Voss picked up his pen. All right, he said. I believe I have enough, Your Honor. The entire room turned. Nova Whitaker had pushed her wheelchair out from the row of benches and into the center aisle, and its left wheel gave a dry, broken squeak beneath that low ceiling. Please let me speak. Judge Voss looked down at the young woman in the aisle. He had occupied this bench for 11 years, and he had heard thousands of petitions concerning people whose opinions no one in the room had bothered to ask. You're the proposed ward, he said. You have the right to speak. Go ahead. Nova pushed her wheelchair forward another 2 turns of the wheels, then stopped. She had no papers. My name is Nova Whitaker, Your Honor, she said. I am 23 years old, and despite what that petition claims, I am a fully functioning, tax-paying freelance translator. I hold a degree with near-perfect marks, and I earn my own living independently. I earned all of that money from the basement of Mrs. Halloran's house, the basement right beside the laundry room. In the spring, water seeped through the bottom of the walls. I had pneumonia twice down there. The second time, I was sick in bed for 4 days, and my sister slept on the floor beside me because there wasn't enough room in that room for a second chair. The courtroom was silent. In the petition, I'm described as a dependent. Nova began speaking more slowly. I am dependent, Your Honor. I'm not hiding that. I depend on my sister. Our parents died when I was 5 and she was 10. For 18 years, every single day, one person has pushed me, lifted me, bathed me. And in those 18 years, not once, not one time in 1800 times, or however many times it has been, has she ever made me feel like a burden. Not one sigh. Not one glance at the clock. I know because I sit at the level of people's stomachs, Your Honor. I see everything they think I don't see. I see people glance at the clock. I see them sigh when they think I'm occupied. My sister never has. Not once in 18 years, she looked directly at the judge. Mrs. Halloran had 4 years. Cordelia didn't move. For 4 years I ate at the dining table in her house, Nova said. For 4 years I slept beneath her floor. 1,462 days. And during all those days, she never once acknowledged me as a human being. To her, I was just a ghost in the basement, an invisible problem she wished would disappear. Whitfield shifted slightly. He didn't stand. She never called me by my name, Nova continued, her voice catching but remaining steady. Not once. I was just the wheelchair girl, a piece of broken furniture hidden away, so it wouldn't ruin the view of her perfect life. I was lying right there in that damp room, listening to her talk down to me, hearing how easily she erased my existence from her home. She paused for a beat. I used to think it was because she was cruel. I don't think that anymore. I think it was simpler than that. Before you can call someone by their name, you first have to acknowledge that they're a person. She couldn't take that first step, so she never reached the second one. To her, I was a piece of furniture with wheels. That piece of furniture ruined the sightline in the foyer. For 4 years, I was an aesthetic problem. Voss was watching her. He had set his pen down. Today, Nova said. She came here and said she couldn't sleep because of me. She said she was worried about me. She asked the court to send a stranger to take control of where I live, where I receive medical care, and how my money is spent. She spoke the next sentence very softly. Your Honor, what frightens me isn't that she might win. What frightens me is that this works. Because if it works on me, someone with a college degree and tax returns and a sister who managed to find a lawyer, then it works on everyone like me who doesn't have those things. How many people are sitting in a room somewhere right now while no one asks their name, Your Honor? I don't know. But I know that today I was allowed to speak, and they weren't. She drew in a breath. I'm asking the court for one thing, only one thing, and then I'll sit down. Voss nodded. Nova turned her wheelchair around. The left wheel squeaked. She looked directly at the woman in gray wool sitting about 10 feet away. Please ask her what my middle name is. No one moved. Voss turned. Mrs. Halloran. Cordelia Halloran sat perfectly straight. She had been sitting straight for 2 hours, and she remained straight now, both hands folded in her lap, staring ahead, with nothing at all on her face. Whitfield leaned toward her and whispered something. She didn't turn. Mrs. Halloran, Voss said a second time. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. In courtroom 1804. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sound no one had noticed during the past 2 hours, and that now seemed deafeningly clear. 4 seconds. 5. Cordelia opened her mouth. Then she closed it again. 6 seconds. 7. Aurelia sat in the front row and realized that at some point her hands had loosened, and she was counting. She couldn't stop herself, counting the way she had counted that night in February. 8, 9, 10, 11. Cordelia Halloran didn't answer. A chair scraped backward in the fourth row. Your Honor. Aurelia turned, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Preston Halloran stood up. No one had known he was there. He had entered after the hearing began and taken a seat in the corner. And not a single person in the room, including his mother, had known he was present. Who are you? Voss asked. My name is Preston Halloran. I'm Mrs. Cordelia Halloran's son. I'm Aurelia Whitaker's former husband. I'm asking permission to testify. Whitfield sprang to his feet. Your Honor, this man isn't a party to these proceedings, and I object. Sit down, Voss said. Preston walked forward. His hand trembled when he raised it, and everyone in the room saw. During our marriage, I underwent fertility testing, he said. First in the spring, then again in the summer, and once more the following winter. 3 times, all 3 tests gave the same result. The problem was mine. There was nothing wrong with my wife, nothing at all, and I knew that from the very first test. My father, Dr. Benedict Halloran, signed an order moving my records into restricted storage within the Halloran Medical Group system. He had the authority to do that because he was the network medical director. After that, the family physician could only see my wife's records. My wife's records were normal, so they called it unexplained infertility, and they told her that for 4 years. No one in the room breathed. Shortly after my final round of testing, my mother handed me a document, he said, a non-disclosure agreement drafted by the family's attorneys to ensure my diagnosis remained buried. I signed it. No one held anything to my head, Your Honor, and I want that made clear. I signed because my mother told me to sign, and because my entire life I had done everything my mother told me to do. Voss wrote, There's one more thing, Preston said. Years ago, my wife's sister was evaluated by 3 physicians and found eligible for spinal decompression surgery. The procedure wasn't approved. The decision was signed at the network level. I heard my parents discussing it in the kitchen of our house that fall. I heard enough to understand. I said nothing. He stopped. I'm not doing this to be forgiven, he said. I know that isn't possible. I'm doing it because on the night of February 5th, I stood 16 inches away from my wife while my mother called her and her sister burdens in front of 40 people. And I had 11 seconds, and I remained silent. I stayed silent once already, Your Honor. I can't live through doing it a second time. He stepped down from the witness stand. As he passed the front row, he stopped for half a second. He said nothing. Aurelia didn't stand, didn't reach out, and didn't cry. She looked at him and nodded exactly once. That was all. It was everything he received, and they both knew it was all there could ever be, and he walked out of the courtroom. Voss dismissed the petition on the spot. He entered into the record that the proposed ward possessed full decision-making capacity, and that he found no basis for any restrictive intervention. And on the final line, he added a sentence. The clerk had to ask him to repeat for confirmation. The court notes that this petition appears to have been used for a purpose other than protection. 3 weeks later, the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, DEED, issued an emergency suspension of Dr. Benedict Halloran's medical license and referred the file to the State Attorney General's office for possible criminal liability involving the falsification of medical records. The Tribune published its story the following Sunday, 5,000 words, front page photograph. Within 9 days, 8 donors withdrew from the Halloran Family Trust. The board dissolved itself, and Northgate Fiduciary Services issued a statement saying it had never had any involvement in the matter. No one was hurt, No one knocked on anyone's door at 3 in the morning. It was all done with paper. The following month, while reviewing records for submission to the attorney, Aurelia opened Nova's medical billing account and sat staring at the screen for a long time. The balance was zero. She pulled up the transaction history. A single payment of $214,000 had been made on February 27th, a few weeks after they first met, and just one day before she moved to Ravenswood. The payer was listed as a trust company in Delaware, and it took her 40 minutes to trace it through 3 layers beneath the surface. She called him that same night, and she said exactly one sentence before he had time to greet her. "You had no right." "No," Ryan said. "I told you not to do anything. You told me not to destroy them." "I didn't destroy them. You knew exactly what I meant." "Yes," he said. "I knew." She stood in the kitchen of the 4th-floor apartment preparing to say more, and then she couldn't. Because she had just understood something. He had paid it 8 months earlier, one day before he drove them away, which meant he had paid it at the exact moment he knew with certainty that he would never see them again. And he hadn't said a word to anyone. Not to her. Not to Teddy. He had left no trace except 3 layers of companies and a date. Nova underwent surgery in May. Pike performed it at Rush, 5.5 hours, and he did it free of charge, and he wouldn't let anyone call it a favor. He called it the surgery that should have happened in 2022. Aurelia stood outside the waiting room for all 5.5 hours and didn't sit down once, because she had stood outside enough operating rooms to know that sitting didn't make time pass any faster. The surgery didn't create a miracle. There was no moment when Nova rose from her wheelchair. There would never be a moment like that, and Pike had told both sisters so plainly beforehand, twice, so that neither of them entered the operating room carrying false hope. What Nova regained was somewhere else. 6 weeks after surgery, sensation began returning from her hips down to the middle of her thighs, a faint territory of feeling that had been completely empty for 6 years. And she regained bladder control, something outsiders never thought about, but anyone who had lived without it understood exactly what it was worth. "It doesn't sound like a miracle," Nova told her sister one evening in July, when the two of them were sitting on the balcony of the Ravenswood apartment while a summer shower came down. She stretched her hand beyond the railing, then did something she hadn't been able to do in 6 years. She placed her palm on her thigh, and she felt the cold rain there, beneath her hand, against her own skin. "Tell someone I can feel rain on my legs and they'll look at me like I'm a little slow," she said. "But if you went 6 years without feeling rainfall on your legs, you'd understand." That same summer, Nova founded a nonprofit organization. She named it 11 Seconds. No one except 3 people knew where the name came from, and Nova liked it that way. The organization did exactly one thing: provided free legal assistance to disabled people whose rights were being taken away through guardianship proceedings, the same kind of proceeding that had nearly swallowed her whole 9 months earlier. Teddy agreed to serve as unpaid legal counsel, and it was the first time in her life she had ever done anything without charging for it, and she didn't explain why, and no one asked. Aurelia returned to the emergency department at Northwestern Memorial in the fall. She completed her probationary period. She worked nights because night shifts paid more, and because she was more accustomed to 3 in the morning than she was to daylight. She didn't accept a single cent from Ryan. She paid the rent with her own salary. Nova's new wheelchair, a good one, she paid off over 24 months. The matter of the $214,000 was never mentioned again after that telephone call, and Aurelia was never able to repay it, and both of them knew it was the kind of debt that couldn't be measured in money, so they left it resting where it was. They had dinner together every Thursday night. That was all. Nothing more. A small restaurant in Lincoln Square, a table in the corner. And Ryan always arrived first and always sat facing the door because there were habits a man like him couldn't abandon. They didn't hold hands across the table. No evening ever ended with anything larger than a goodbye on the sidewalk. She had told him once that she couldn't fix him, and she remained true to those words, and he never asked her to try. One Thursday evening in October, as she stood and put on her coat to leave, he said, "Let me call a car for you, Aurelia." Her hand stopped halfway through the motion, one arm still inside the sleeve. He had never called her by her name. In 8 months of sitting across the table from her, he hadn't said it once. He said you. He said Miss Whitaker. He avoided her name the way a person avoided touching something he was afraid he might damage. And now he had spoken it, Aurelia, 4 ordinary syllables, as casually as paying the check. She stood there for a while. "No one called me by my name for 4 years, she said. She said nothing more. Neither did he. He only nodded once, as though he had already known, as though that was precisely why he had waited 8 months before saying it. Beyond the restaurant windows, the streets of Lincoln Square glowed beneath the lights, and people moved through the early season cold. And somewhere north of the city, in a 4th-floor apartment with an elevator, a 24-year-old woman was translating a commercial contract and occasionally placing a hand on her thigh simply to make certain she could still feel it there. On February 9th, 2027, exactly 1 year after that night, the 3 of them returned to the alley. They went in daylight, and they went because Nova wanted to, not because anyone suggested it. The air was cold but clear, there was no storm, and the West Loop was crowded now, people hurrying past with coffee in their hands. Delivery trucks parked 2 rows deep, a new restaurant open at the end of the street where, the year before, there had been nothing but wind. Aurelia pushed her sister's wheelchair through the thin layer of snow, still clinging to the edge of the road, and they stopped in front of the brick wall. It was small. That was the first thing that struck all 3 of them, how ordinary and insignificant it was. Just a patch of old brick behind a building, a broken awning, a stretch of concrete with nothing remarkable about it. At night, beneath the storm, in the grip of hypothermia, it had been an entire world. In daylight, it was somewhere people passed without looking. It looks so small, Nova said. Aurelia studied the wall for a while. It used to be everything, she said. Ryan stood 1 step behind the sisters, and he said nothing. Over the past year, he had learned that there were moments when the right thing for a man like him to do was step back and remain silent. They stood there for a few minutes. Then they left. And no one felt the need to say anything more about it, because the alley had completed its work a year earlier, and now it was only a wall. The old wheelchair was still stored in the basement of the Ravenswood apartment building. Nova had a new chair now, a good one, smooth and quiet, with wheels that didn't squeak. But she wouldn't let anyone throw the old one away, and she wouldn't let anyone repair the left wheel. Aurelia once suggested having it oiled so it wouldn't make so much noise, and Nova shook her head. "I want to hear that squeak," she said. "It reminds me that I'm still here." The sound had followed them through 4 days of wandering, had cried out in an alley where no one heard it, had sounded in the middle of courtroom 1804 at the exact second everything turned. And Nova kept it the way people kept a scar, not because of the pain, but because it proved they had survived. That night, February 9th, after taking the sisters home, Ryan Ferrante returned to the 18-room house in Kenilworth and went directly into the study. The east wing had been reopened since summer, the covers had been removed, and Morris Soul had placed the blue upholstered chair back in its proper position against the wall, and no one had discussed it. It had simply happened. He switched on the desk lamp. He pulled the brown leather notebook toward him, the notebook he had spent a year looking at without writing in it, the notebook he had opened once and then closed. He turned to the final blank page, the page that had remained empty for the years since her passing. He picked up a pen, and for the first time in all that time he wrote. He wrote 3 short lines, Aurelia, Nova, February 9th. Then he turned back 1 page to the page before it, where there was a line in slanted blue handwriting that he had never truly read during all the years he had avoided the notebook. And now he read it slowly. Katrina had written it sometime during the years they had shared, written it for a future she wouldn't be there to see. And he had carried the notebook with him for 6 years, without ever reading that line, because he had been afraid of what the dead left behind. He sat with it for a very long time. For an entire year, Ryan Ferrante had believed that on that February night, he had saved 2 people. He had carried them out of the snow, taken them home, quietly paid a debt of $214,000, and in his mind he had been the one who acted. It took him a full year to understand that he had seen it backward. He hadn't saved anyone. That night, he had done only one thing, the smallest thing one human being could do for another. He had stopped. He had told the driver to back up, and he had knelt in the snow. Everything that came afterward, the complaint written without a single adjective, the 22 stitches placed at the kitchen table, by hands that didn't tremble, the young woman in the wheelchair asking a woman dressed in gray wool To say her middle name in the middle of a courtroom, all of it, they had done themselves. He had only stopped long enough to see them. And it turned out that was all any of us truly needed, not to be rescued, but for someone to stop and see us human beings. Because a person's dignity had never depended on whether they were healed, whether they rose from a wheelchair, or whether anyone came to save them. It lived in the fact that someone, even one person, was willing to call them by their true name and acknowledge that they existed. Cordelia Halloran had possessed everything, and for 4 years she couldn't perform that small act. Ryan Ferrante had almost nothing decent within him, but on one stormy night, he had managed it for a single moment. And one moment was enough to change the course of 3 lives. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, press the like button, and share this video so that together we can continue listening to more meaningful stories every day. How do you feel about the story of Aurelia, Nova, and Ryan? And do you see people in your own life who are waiting for someone to call them by their true name, to recognize them as complete human beings? Please leave a comment and share what you feel from the deepest part of your heart, because we always hope to hear what you carry with you after each story. Thank you for staying with us until the final moments. May you, the person watching this video, always have abundant health, a joyful life each day, and a peaceful soul. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.